My hometown is very small and rural. And technically speaking, it's not even a town. It is considered an unincorporated area. There is no town council, no library, not even a police force of any kind. State troopers swing through every 3 or 4 days or so. I always had 2 jobs when I came home from college for the summer. During the day, I worked at a farm supply store, and at night tended bar. I tend to make my own entertainment, so I loved both jobs. The store sold hardware, tools, cattle feed, horse feed, fertilizer, etc. Whenever someone ordered feed or fertilizer, the warehouse crew would load the customer's purchase onto their trucks. Sometimes, the ticket would be for 2 to 3 50-pound bags of feed. Sometimes, it would be 2 to 3 tons. One day, at the farm supply store, I was working the warehouse with my coworker and friend Snacking Sam. He ate constantly, but weighed about 120 pounds soaking wet. It was a really slow day right before closing time, so Sam and I were sitting on the dock outside the bay doors of the warehouse, listening to the radio and smoking cigarettes. Michelle, the assistant manager, came into the warehouse and handed me a ticket for a ton of pig feed. I looked at my watch, jokingly cocked an eyebrow at her, and hopped onto the forklift. The 50-pound bags came to the store on pallets, so each pallet held 40 bags. The farm industry takes all kinds, so I'd seen everything from small-time farmers making their own way, covered in mud and shit and sweat, to pristine multi-millionaire farm owners who ran operations employing 100 or more people. A flatbed Chevy pulled around through the side gate and backed up to the dock. A guy, mid-50s, hopped out of the driver's side door. He was probably about 5'10" and 180 pounds, and he looked like he was a small-time farmer. He was wearing jeans, a long-sleeve button-up, and he had a pronounced limp. He was tan and weather-worn, salt and pepper hair, really starting to gray at the temples. He deftly hopped up onto the dock. It was about chest-high if you were facing it from the ground, and watched me drive the pallet of feed towards the dock. I got the pallet lowered onto the bed of the truck, then got off the forklift to have him sign his ticket. As I approached him, we swapped hellos and I handed him the clipboard. I always tried to make a point to greet our customers by name, but I saw on the ticket that he had paid with cash. He signed his ticket and then said, "Hey man, I'm Eddie. I need some help. I got this busted knee and I gotta get all this shit unloaded before dinner. You mind riding with me over to my place and helping me unload? I ain't got no forklift at the house. I'm right over off the Highway 22, about 3 miles from here." I'd made these arrangements before with customers I knew, and this guy seemed pretty harmless. I told him I could help him out, and since it was 5 o'clock, I was about to clock out anyway. He said, "I really appreciate it. I'll pay you $20 for your trouble." I clocked out, said goodbye to Snacking Sam and Michelle, and then went to my truck. He was parked, idling on the edge of the road in our gravel parking lot, and I threw a wave to him to know I was ready to go. We pulled onto Highway 22, a winding 2-lane highway that led from our hometown down to a lake, and further away from civilization. My father had always called Highway 22 the Jack Hanna Memorial Expressway because it was constantly overrun with deer, opossums, raccoons, coyotes, snakes, and every other manner of wildlife. We turned off a few miles down the highway onto a red dirt road that snaked its way through several hilly pine thickets. I'd grown up in the area, but I'd never been down this particular road, so I left a little room between my truck and his. There was a field fence along the roadside, and I presumed we were close to his house. The man stopped at a pipe railgate in the fence and motioned for me to come to his window. I ran over to his truck, and he said, "Might want to ride down to the house with me. It's rough and narrow, so it's hard to get turned around if you have more than one truck down here." I said okay, locked my truck, and got in with him. He had both windows down and was listening to a classic country station that broadcast from Montgomery. I noticed there was a roach in his ashtray, and as he was driving, he realized I'd seen it. "Yeah, helps out with my knee pain." He laughed. "You know how it is." Indeed I did. Snacking Sam was my summertime connection for decent pot. We made small talk for a while as we rode along the uneven gravel and dirt road. At one particular rough patch in the road, something bumped into the back of my boot. I looked down to see that a short, single-edged knife had jostled from underneath the seat and onto the floorboard. It had a slick wooden handle and a curved blade that I immediately recognized as a gut knife, commonly used for slaughtering hogs and field dressing deer. This one was covered in dry blood everywhere except the handle. None of this was particularly troublesome right away, as we were in the heart of Alabama's deer hunting lands, and the guy owned hogs. What was troubling was how he reacted when he saw that I was half reaching down to move the knife. "Oh, sorry. I was using that the other night and forgot to clean it up. Just slide back underneath the seat. Make sure you grab it by the handle so you don't get any blood on you." This was not too terribly long after the OJ trial, so that statement set off several alarm bells for me. Shortly thereafter, we arrived at a decently built pole barn. We started unloading the bags towards the middle of the barn so they'd stay dry if it rained. I didn't talk much while we worked, because I was still kinda weirded out by this guy. And as we were working, he started asking a lot of seemingly random, drug-related questions. "Know anyone around here who sells good shit?" "Nope." "You know that black fella in Asher they say killed that teacher?" I lied and said I didn't. His name was Terrence Quincy, and he was a junior in high school when he had killed our assistant football coach and had, for the time being, gotten away with it. "I do," he said nonchalantly. "I heard that guy's fucking foster son owed him money, and he wouldn't pay up." "Huh," I replied. "Same thing with that Corey Killencat. He's the one they found in the trunk of that burnt-out car in Kaloa Springs. They say he was selling dope and got in with the wrong crowd. Couldn't pay his up man." I lied again and said I hadn't heard about it. Eventually, he sat down and watched while I was unloading feed. He said, "Lots of people selling drugs don't know what they're getting into, and they get in over their head. Even people doing it small time thinking they ain't hurting nobody. They just can't keep up. And it ain't like missing a car payment. The real ones won't take their shit back if you can't sell it." At this point, I was 50-50 on whether he was a drug dealer or an undercover cop, so either way, I was only interested in getting back to my truck and going home. He got back up and helped me finish unloading after a few minutes. He said, "I gotta take a piss. I'll be right back." I quickly went to the truck, retrieved the knife, and wiped my fingerprints off the handle. I used my shirt to put it back under the seat, checked to see if he was coming yet, and then parked my ass in the passenger seat. I had a quick look around and decided to open the center console. There were napkins, Taco Bell sauce packs, the usual. Underneath, however, was a Glock 19 and a glass pipe, its bowl caked in black gunk. Probably not a cop. I waited for what seemed like forever, and I got impatient. It was starting to get dark, and I very much wanted to be away from this guy. I walked around the pole barn and saw him standing 20 feet away on the edge of the woods, talking on a cell phone. I couldn't make out what it was he was saying, but he was very animated. I decided to go back to the truck. He turned to me, rushed his phone call to an end, started walking back towards the truck. We got a few hundred feet down the drive, and he just blurted out, "I ain't got no fucking money. Just remember I don't have any more cash. So sorry, Charlie." I told him not to worry about it. We didn't say much on the way back. I kept my boot half-tucked underneath the seat so that I could feel the handle of the knife. I had a really sketchy feeling about the guy, and knowing the knife was there made me feel better. He never came back into our store, and I never saw him again. Thank God for that. This is my first time ever writing a post on Reddit, so if I somehow mess up the formatting here, please forgive me. I really don't come to this site at all, but after being linked to a story here a few weeks back, I've been sucked into reading them and felt compelled to share my own experience. When I was in 8th grade, my parents separated. Basically, my mom packed her and I up one night, and we moved into my grandpa's and didn't look back. We ended up living there through my high school years, and when he died, my parents officially got divorced. My mom remarried, and we moved into the city with my stepfather. My grandpa lived on the first floor of the apartment, and the owners, an elderly couple who were family to us through marriage, lived on the second floor. The property also had a small in-law cottage out in the back where my uncle lived. The back door opened into a landing where there was a locked and deadbolted door to our apartment, and then 2 sets of stairs. One led up to the also locked and deadbolted door of the second floor apartment, and the other led down to the basement where there was also no lock. Our apartment could also be entered from the front of the building, but in order to access the second floor apartment or the basement, you had to go through this landing. The basement was actually pretty nice, and at one point they had started to convert it into its own apartment, before they ultimately decided to make the in-law cottage instead. So, in the basement there was a full kitchen, complete with an oven, sink, and refrigerator. The washer and dryer, which was shared by all of us, was also in the basement, as well as just some general storage stuff. The basement was entirely open except for a back room that was full of storage. It had one of those kind of swinging saloon-type doors where you could see above and below it. The storage area was longer than it was deep, so you couldn't really see anything much behind the doors, aside from shelves you had to walk in them and turn slowly to really see the room. One night, when I was in high school, I think I was 15 at the time, after taking a shower, I saw that the laundry bin in the bathroom was pretty full. So I grabbed a ton of laundry and headed down towards the basement. It was pretty late at night, but I figured I would at least get it started and move some things over in the morning. I tossed everything onto the ground and started sorting out the colors when I got hit with this horrible feeling in my gut. The basement was not at all a creepy basement. It was well lit and pretty welcoming with the kitchen and everything, but for some reason that I can't explain, something just started to feel wrong. Anyone who has ever been hit with this feeling that they were being watched knows exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know how or why, but it came over me. But it was also something that I couldn't shake, and I found myself looking over to the saloon doors and only part of the basement that I couldn't see in its entirety. I don't know why. Maybe just to assure myself I was being a big baby. I started to walk towards the back room, but stopped myself just as I reached out towards the swinging doors. I've been a horror fan for as long as I can remember, and I had seen more horror movies than I could count. And I knew that if that was a movie, I would be calling myself a dumbass and saying not to go back into that room. I quickly snapped my hand back and ran up the stairs, leaving all the clothes behind, and into our apartment, where I locked the doors and immediately told my mom that I had just had the worst feeling in the basement, and that I was super creeped out. Despite me not being the type of person that scares easily, she basically rolled her eyes at me and told me to go to bed. I ended up doing as I was told, though it took me a bit to shake the feeling, and I finally fell asleep. Later that night, my bladder woke me up, and I stumbled out of my room to go to the bathroom. I didn't turn any of the lights on as I started making my way towards the bathroom, because it usually woke up my grandpa, and I didn't want to bother him. When I got closer to the bathroom, I noticed my mom standing in the doorway of her bedroom, and something looked off, and it took me a moment to realize that she was clutching the phone. She then noticed me and whispered to me to get against the wall, which I did without hesitation. It took a few moments for the grogginess to wear off, and my eyes to adjust to the darkness before I could see what she did. My mom's bedroom was immediately off of the kitchen. The kitchen was where the back door that led to the landing and the basement was located. The door had a tiny window up top with a small but thick curtain. It was thin enough that you could see that someone was outside of the door, but thick enough to not be able to make out any of the features of the person on the other side. But there was someone on the other side of the door, and every now and then the doorknob would move, and you could hear this scratching sound was on the other side. I have never been so afraid in my entire life. I'm not sure how I managed to do what I did next. It was like someone else had taken control over me entirely. I slid down against the wall that I was clinging to and started to crawl against it in the darkness towards the kitchen. My mom looked petrified, watching back and forth between me and the back door. She kept whispering for me to stop and go back, but I kept moving forward, low and against the wall, towards the counter where I carefully grabbed the butcher knife. I was shaking the whole time I moved with a knife in my hand on the ground next to the fridge, which was next to the door the man was trying to get into. I had this horrible feeling that I was going to be killed, but if I wasn't going to go down without a fight. It felt like I sat there forever in the darkness next to the door with my mom hiding in the bedroom doorway across from me, just waiting. But it was only for a few minutes. My mom had already called 911 before I had woken up and stumbled my way towards the bedroom. The lights from the approaching squad car soon filled the kitchen, and from the other side of the door I could hear a sudden clamoring and commotion and the slam of the back screen bursting open as the would-be assailant took off running. It was around 3 a.m. when this happened, so it was completely dark outside, and we lived right by some train tracks and very thick bushes and trees that made it easy for the man to escape the cops that pursued him. The police came in and took statements from my mom and I. My grandpa, who was partially deaf, had managed to sleep through almost the entire thing until the police came through to search the apartment and to make sure that we were okay. The outside of the door and the doorknob were both covered in deep scratches, like someone had been going at it with a knife, trying to figure out how to get inside. But that wasn't the most horrifying part for me. That was reserved for the basement. The clothes that I had brought down were not where I had left them, and they had been thrown about and disheveled. And the back room, the one with the swinging door that I had stopped myself from going in, the boxes that were out of view had also been thrown about, all open, obviously gone through, with some things missing. And there were some wrappers from food on the floor. He had been down there, looking for something to steal. He was down there when I went down to do the laundry. I had almost walked into that room, and based on what we had seen on the door, he had a knife. To this day, I can't help but find myself sometimes thinking about what would have happened if I had walked into that room.